All right. Hopefully that'll work. Good evening, everyone. Today is lesson number 12. Jacob moves to Egypt, February 21st, 2021. The text is Genesis, the 46th chapter, verses 1 through 7, 28th verse through 30, 47th chapter, verses 11 through 13, and the 27th and 28th verse of the 47th chapter. The key verse is in Genesis 47th chapter, verse 27, and it says, "And Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions therein, and grew and multiplied exceedingly." And the application is the student will conclude that God sees into the future and has already made provisions for his needs. So the lesson is Jacob and his family coming to Egypt and doing what it is that the Lord has asked them to do. And so Jacob is 130 years old, and he is living in Canaan, and the Lord wanted to move him down to Egypt to help his family and secure them. And Hebron was his home, and even though the famine was bad and sure to get worse, it was a challenge for him to move his family to Egypt. You got to look to his grandfather had been there and been mistreated, and he'd gotten into trouble in Egypt and had been run out of the country. That's found in Genesis, the 12th chapter. And his father had attempted to go there once, but God stopped him, and that was in Genesis, the 26th chapter, verses 1 and 2. These incidents may have been in Jacob's mind as he faced this move. So you got to look at, possible anxiety that Jacob was having about going to a land that had idolatry as its mainstay, if you would. And but the famine that was taking place was so horrendous that he picked up his family and he followed the grace of God, and he moved his people down to Egypt. The God of Canaan is also the God in Egypt. God was in Hebron, and he was also in Egypt. Moving to Egypt was God's specific way of providing for his people during these troubling times. And him moving down there, he was down in Egypt for 17 years. So let's look at part 1. Jacob moves to Egypt, and that's Genesis, the 46th chapter, verses 1 through 7. It says, "And Israel took his journey with all that he had, and came to Beersheba, and offered sacrifices unto God of his father Isaac. And God spake unto Israel in the visions of the night, and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here am I. And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. I will go down and with thee into Egypt, and I will surely bring thee up again." Did you notice that? I will go down with you into Egypt, but I will bring thee up again. And that's a spiritual message, if you would, taking place. Continuing in verse 4, "Bring them up again, and Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes." And Jacob rose up from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, and their little ones, and their wives, in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. And they took their cattle and their goods, which they had gotten in the land of land of Canaan, and came into Egypt, Jacob and all his seed with him, and his sons and his sons' sons with him, and his daughters and his sons' daughters, and all his seed brought he with him into Egypt. So when you look at this, there was a message that was given by God, and it was sent to him in a dream. And in his dream, God began by calling Jacob by name. I think it's a beautiful picture because God knows us, and he knows us individually. He knows us, the hairs on our heads. He knows every individual member of our body. That's how intimate God is with you and I. And even though he loves us and he cares for us, isn't it interesting, the trepidation, if you would, of Jacob as to going into this land. Having caution is not a bad thing, but caution when it leads to doubt is. And so we need to understand, whether or not this is something that God is leading us to, or if this is truly something that is of Satan. And God cleared that up for Jacob. He cleared it up by telling him specifically that I'm calling you down here. I'm telling you to go down here. God gave him 3 promises. The first, God promised that he had a plan for Jacob in Egypt. The journey to Egypt was part of the will of God for his family, and God was going to make a great nation out of Jacob and his sons. And understand that he goes in to this land with 70 people. I don't know if you get that, but 70 people, that was his family. That's what went into the land. But he's going to come out a great nation out of this. Second, then God assured Jacob that he would be with him in Egypt, just as he had been with him in Haran and in Canaan. And God is not limited to a place or a time. He can bless us wherever we are. It's important for you and I to understand that God is with us. Third, God also assured Jacob that he would return again to the land that he loved. Jacob would be reunited with Joseph in Egypt, would not be his final home, nor would it be the home of his people. With this reassurance, Jacob continued his journey and came into the land of Egypt. The Bible tells us that the total 70 people made up Jacob's family when he came into Egypt. Years later, over 600,000 men and mixed multitude would return to Canaan. In Exodus, the 12th chapter, verse 37. What a rich blessing that is. I mean, to know that you have entered in, you've done exactly what it is God's asking you to do. You've gone into this land with 70 people and you come out with 600,000 people. That's just a blessing. Jacob's family is together again, and this is the second part, verses 28 through 30 of the 46th chapter. It says, "And he sent Judah before him unto Joseph to direct his face unto Goshen, and they came into the land of Goshen. And Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father to Goshen, and presented himself unto him. And he fell on his neck, and wept on his neck for a good while. And Israel said unto Joseph, Now let me die, since I have seen thy face, because thou art yet alive." Understand that Jacob saw Joseph as being, dead, killed from wild animals. That was a story that got back to him. So, he had lived with this for years and years. And and his other sons that had lied to him, you got to look at this and know that Judah, I'm sorry, not Judah, Jacob is finding out, that his son is alive. As they approached Egypt, Jacob sent Judah to find Joseph, and Joseph directed them to the land of Goshen. And Goshen was a flat, fertile area. This land was much like the area around Hebron. Though it was flat, this was a good place to graze the sheep and cattle Jacob had brought with him. And understand, Jacob was told by message to leave everything behind, come, and Pharaoh would give him every single thing that he had left behind and bring that to him. Jacob didn't do that. Jacob brought all of his goods with him. He didn't leave any of those things behind. As soon as Jacob arrived, Joseph prepared his chariot and rode out to meet his family. He had not lost the proper respect for his father. He took and he bowed down before his father, and he showed his father love and respect, which is what every child should do to their parents, is show them respect. This was a joyous reunion, and the two men, father and son, hugged each other and wept for a long time. It is interesting that the great joy often produces the same emotions as great sorrow. We can imagine the joy of Jacob not only at seeing Joseph, but also seeing that Joseph had been very successful. Joseph was a ruler in Egypt. For years, Jacob had thought that his beloved son had been killed by a wild animal. He had been told that Joseph was alive, but now he saw it with his own eyes. And after being lied to for so long, you got to understand that it's something where he's finally being told the truth, and then also seeing it with his own eyes, seeing the truth. So Jacob expressed his happiness by stating now he could die in peace because he had at least seen the face of Joseph. Jacob would live for many more years. He had been reunited with his lost son. Joseph understood the ways of Egyptians, and although Jacob and his sons were primarily shepherds, he told them to emphasize that they kept cattle when they met Pharaoh. The Egyptians did not like sheep or shepherds, and Joseph saw no reason to anger them. Armed with this good advice, Jacob then met Pharaoh. So the third part, Israel prospers in Egypt, in Genesis the 47th chapter, verses 11 through 13, and then the 27th and 28th verse. Understand this is fertile land. So starting off verse 11, it says, And Joseph placed his father and his brethren and gave them possession in the land of Egypt. In other words, gave them land, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses. And Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph nourished his father and his brethren and all the father's household with bread according to their families. And there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very sore, so that the land of Egypt and all the land of Canaan fainted by reason of the famine. And Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions therein, and grew and multiplied exceedingly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, so the whole age of Jacob was 147 years. And so one of the things that you need to draw from this is how high, as far as respect and honor, Joseph was, but that he still honored his father even greater, and gave that to Jacob. He gave the honor that he was due. In these verses, we see how Joseph cared for his family, and also Joseph's wisdom in using this time of famine to Pharaoh's advantage. A lot of people, 7 years of famine would just be overwhelming for them. And yet you have to see through all this that God provided. God provided for his people. God provided for those who stayed in his way. God provided a means for Joseph and Jacob to be reunited. The brothers, they were all told the same thing, and that was to not say that you were shepherds. And yet they went before Pharaoh, and that was the first thing they did. The reason why is because shepherds were an abomination in Egypt. However, when 5 of his brothers appeared before Pharaoh, they plainly told Pharaoh that they were shepherds. Pharaoh did not rebuke or punish them. His love for Joseph was greater than his prejudice. And so Joseph responded by settling his family near Ramses, the storehouse, a city that was located in the land of Goshen. Hundreds of years later, when Israel left, this is where they took all the storehouses and completely just removed everything from them when they went back to the promised land. This is a lesson in the great overriding plans of God and his providence for us in all of these things. Joseph provided abundantly for his family during the famine. He saw to it that his family did not suffer or lack for anything. This is a picture of the grace of God providing abundance even for those who once may have been enemies of the cross and persecutors of God's people. It's interesting to me that when you look at this, you have to come away with it, God's grace and his providing for his people and the love that he has for his people. He provides a way for them to take in, go through hard times. We go through good times, and it's hard for us to keep our focus and take and give all honor and glory to God during those good times. But this is even in the suffering times, the 7 years of famine, God provided for this family. And that is such a beautiful thing that he did. And so when you take time this week to read this lesson, I hope that you have a little bit of time to study out and find out the importance of the land and where he set his family up. And also when God references going down to Egypt versus coming up out of it, you need to understand that there's a spiritual message that's there. This was a nation that was full of idolatry, and yet God had provided a way for them to take and go away from idolatry and go to serving the one true God. And yet Egypt didn't. In large part they didn't. The part that actually did were the part that took and adhered themselves to Jacob and his family. And that's important for you and I to get that, is he provided a way. So I hope you guys have a good week. I hope that you take time to read this lesson and study it out. And love you guys and hope to see you soon.